I wanted to make a bit of a different video. You know how we did, because with this conversation of that other video that I made where I was wearing these same sandals, I remembered what I was doing at that time, and I was critiquing a book called The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir, and I guess it's these titles that have hooked me up with a different kind of audience. But actually, you know, it's not particularly about sex, it's just well, it was about feminism, right? But today I want to do something different. Also, I'm also going to use a very marketable title, because this is going to be about satanic sex, and I've been rereading the Satanic Bible, a book that I had read initially. I must have been like 13 years old. I was definitely younger than 15. So I was very young. I was very naive. I just didn't have much knowledge or information back then. And I don't know how it came up with a friend of mine. I mentioned something about it, and then she said, "Oh, I've never read it." And I said, "Yeah, you should read it. It has just some interesting philosophies in it." And then she started reading it, and she told me how much she was enjoying it. So I thought, well, maybe I should read it again. Because her and I, we discuss a lot of things about self-development, anything from self-development, personal relationships, the interactions between men and women, you know, all the stuff that I like to think about and debate in my head. And recently, where she's been reading Carl Jung, what else have we've been reading a lot of different things. Robert Greene is a big, you know, reference. All of these podcasters like Jordan Peterson and other people that comment on all this stuff, but obviously the books are always better. So like things like Siddhartha. Anyway, let's get on to Anton LaVey's body of work. I have to admit, I don't know so much about this author. I had the impression that this book was a lot older than it is. It's actually from (1969). So it was first published in 1969, and basically it talks about how Satan has been regarded as this evil creature merely because he was used as the adversary or opposition to anything that the Catholic Christian Church wanted to defend and inform about. So he talks about how Catholicism has been very much about guilt. Everything is about finding things that you are guilty of, and then you can confess your sins, and that's the way to achieve heaven. So there's very much this culture of limitation, of the human man having to be less than, adoring this God, and he denounces all of these things as a subversion of the very thing that they say they're doing, because you're meant to be getting salvation, but then that has so many rules, so many hoops that you have to go through. And honestly, everything that he says in that sense, it seems very dated, because nowadays I think most people, even I was raised as a Catholic, you know, most people that are just by default believers in God, they don't actually subscribe to these very kind of old-fashioned rules of how you need to suffer. However, and this is worth mentioning, even though we don't subscribe to these rules and we don't follow these rules, we do subconsciously still I know a lot of people that they very much live in guilt, and they very much are people pleasers, and their morals are very stiff, and this all stems from that culture, actually, from, you know, the family values where you have to be a martyr, and that's the whole story of how all these saints were martyrs and they died for God. Anyway, so Anton LaVey, he denounces all of these things as a philosophy that doesn't really serve us, and that is actually not only it hinders us, it's a hypocrisy, which I agree. I think it is. I think this book has a lot of common sense, and the reason why I would like to read you a few passages and start a commentary on it is because it's just not very referenced. I feel like it's a little bit in the darkness, pun not intended. And so it would be interesting to go through it, because I see this as the origin, as a reference point that a lot of people have taken afterwards. Because all of these self-development gurus and people who have their independent views on how to, it's all very Nietzschean, it's all very much about individualism, you know, Ayn Rand, Camille Paglia, all of these other people that I've spoken about, where it's all about personal fulfillment and how through personal fulfillment the world becomes a better place. And I believe that. And at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. Like, all religions are meant to make you live a more content life and make you achieve peace and happiness. And the ways in which they do so are different from each person. My belief system tends to lean against the individualism. And I know that I am a generous person by nature, and that doesn't interfere, like, it doesn't contradict the fact that I think that if I am the best that I can be, and that if I focus on myself, I truly will be more generous with everyone else, and I truly will contribute a lot more. So, how should we start? So he spends a lot of time at the beginning saying things that for me are very redundant, just things that are obvious, you know, that have been established, like all of these things about how the stories of the church, how the church was trying to find faults in human beings, because then they could, through making people feel limited and guilty, that's how they could make them pay more. So the whole time he spends a lot of time naming and shaming all of these practices. But what I actually find interesting is how succinctly he talks about the power in people. I just think that I like a literature that is founded on that focuses on having power, on having actual magical power within a rational space, because this is very commonsensical and rational. I like that about it. But at the same time, and this is what's fresh and new about it, it's very rational, it's very commonsensical, but at the same time, it does defend the need for humans to have a religion with dogma, and it does sort of believe in magic as well. So it has both parts of the coin, and that is kind of where I land also. I like things that make sense. I don't like things that put me down or limit me in any way. I just think it's completely unnecessary. I agree with him on that completely. But I also really do believe in fantasy and downright, you know, magic. I do. I think it's possible. I think there's a lot we don't know about, our energy bodies and all of that. And I think we have the power to access a lot more than we think we do. So all of the ritualistic aspects, I think, are very valuable. I agree that humans, they want to be in tribes, they want to be with other people, they want to have rituals, and I think there's power to that. And the way he talks about how, for example, during a ritual, the emotions that you have, that's what's going to give you the energy to make things happen. So he talks about bringing up emotions like an orgasmic quality, or anger, or grief. Like, you have to bring up your strongest emotions to make this spell happen, to make it successful. So it's really important that you can access those emotions. That's one of the things he says. But I think we should probably go in order. So let me see. Oh, this book is so badly glued. I mean, can you believe that? It's all broken? And also I have highlighted it to an inch of its life. So we're going to skip the first part. I already told you what happened. One of the very interesting things that it talks about is the history, the story behind all of these names that the church took over to call devils. A lot of these names were not devils originally. And I'm kind of into that idea that you can rescue what are deities and gods from other religions or space or time. Yeah, so he says the fact that religion has been just filled with trying to frighten people, trying to fester your brains with fear and defeat. And it says that in this book you will find truth and fantasy, and that each is necessary for the other to exist. I like that idea of that. It's also very passionate. Like, I'll read you a sentence that I also highlighted. I love this sort of very passionate way of writing. The ravens of night have flown forth to summon Loki, who hath set Valhalla aflame with the searing trident of the inferno. The twilight is done, a glow of new light is born out of the night, and Lucifer is risen. It's fantastic. The world of the flesh and the living shall be the greatest preparation for any and all eternal delight. So he constantly talks about the flesh and how the carnal pleasures are very important, which actually made me think so much of my song Tintarella de Luna extended version, which I will link below and you should check it out. It talks a lot about these things as well. And I wasn't thinking about this. Again, I did not remember this book at all. I was so young when I read it. I remember I liked it, but reading it back, I just cannot remember anything. The flames of hell burn fierce and purify. So there's this idea of purification through using forces that haven't been used. That's the whole point. So it's not about dark forces. It's about redeeming, rescuing these forces that up until that time had been equated with evil, because that's what the church called them for their own intentions. But he says that actually these forces are not evil. So this is not a book about evil. I just want that to be clear. This is a book about saying all of these people that didn't belong to anything, the church decided that they were the evil ones. It changed their history a posteriori. He tells you the real history of these people. For example, Lucifer was the bringer of light. a lot of these gods that we now culturally we put them in hell for some reason, but they didn't originate there. And so he's using those names to create something new, something that isn't necessarily the opposite of the church either. It's just something different that defies the idea that men have to be guilty, fearful of God, and all of these things in order to fulfill their role to go to heaven. That's basically the gist of it. You reject that idea and you say, no, actually, as a human being, I have power in my life and in my body, which I think is interesting because that goes really well with the idea of being grounded on the earth and anchored in the earth. The idea that you not only have to have a spiritual body, but that you actually, the reason why we're on this earth is because we have power in through this earth, actually. Because that's another thing that I've always thought about Eastern mysticism. I've studied this a lot. And at the end of the day, if you are living within a human body, you can't fully abstract yourself from it and think, oh, actually, I'm just gonna refuse all of that and I'm just gonna be meditative and live in my head. That's not how it works. Even if you want it to be 100% spiritual, if you want things to happen in your life is in earth. If you're not grounded on the earth, this is something that I have direct experience with. If you cannot ground on the earth, you cannot summon the powers that you would call supernatural, because at the end of the day, the supernatural powers are actually of the earth. So that makes sense to me, the way that he links the carnal of the human with spirituality, because I think both things come together. The core of the earth comes together with the galaxy. You can't be in the galaxy because then you're not in your body, and then things don't work that way. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, so he denounces people who are righteous. We've seen the Karen emerge in the last decade, so all of these things we've really gotten through now. And I wonder how much of an influence this was, or maybe, there's probably been tons of similar narratives. So the book of Lucifer, he calls it the book of the enlightenment, because as I told you, Lucifer was the god of light. And I'm trying to find what Satan was. Because Satan is the adversary, the opponent, the Lord of Fire. I'll come across it. Oops. Okay, so the Roman god Lucifer was the bearer of light, the spirit of the air, the personification of enlightenment. And then, as I said, he goes, in Christian mythology, he became synonymous with evil, which was only to have been expected from a religion whose very existence is perpetuated by cloudy definitions and bogus values. So it's just, he goes in again and again into talking about this bubble of falsehood. We know that now, I don't think we have to get into it. To the Satanist, God is the balancing factor in nature. This is actually a very Buddhist concept, which you wouldn't imagine to find in the Satanic Bible, but this is what it's about. It's about God is not one person that was born and then died. God is within us. God is in the universe, in the forces of nature. And I like that connection with nature. I think that's very powerful. Talks about how being in touch with your ego is very healthy, and that with religions people have externalized it, But at the end of the day, it's the same thing, because you're choosing a god to kind of represent yourself. At the end of the day, it's the same thing as just praying for yourself. So in this religion that he founded, I don't know how to say it, they don't really idolize them, they don't really pray for them, but they summon, I guess, the 4 crown princes of hell, and these are Satan, the Lord of Fire, the Inferno, the South, Lucifer, the bringer of light, enlightenment, the air, the morning star, the East, Belial, without a master, the baseness of the earth, independence, the North, and Leviathan, the serpent of the deeps, the sea, the West. I think these are such evocative, beautiful concepts. And I think, given what he has said so far, the word devil does not mean what it means in the Catholic religion. It just means a sort of deity. And it's not, as I said, it's not connected to darkness in the Christian point of view. It's connected to darkness in this point of view, in the sense that you are independent from having to subject to someone else or some community or some force. So according to this, you have your individual power, and you don't have to protect yourself from these devils, because these are not devils to you. They're devils to the Catholic religion, which made them up, really. Choosing names of gods from the Romans, from the Hebrew, that's what he says. So I found this also very interesting, because it just lets us know that we don't have to fear these forces, because these are not dark forces in that sense. We don't have to make any sacrifices. To become a Satanist, it is unnecessary to sell your soul to the devil or to make a pact with Satan. This threat was devised by Christianity to terrorize people so they would not stray from the fold. But again, this concept of the devils is also made up by him. So in that sense, it's like you can interpret that as you want. Are we to believe that there is nowhere we can turn to escape fear? I think that's a very valid question, because the whole thing, I think fear is probably the worst. It's just the most detrimental emotion. I think everything negative stems from fear. I don't see any value in it, because anger will bring creativity. Fear is the one thing that we cannot afford to have. So any philosophy, any religion that is gonna make me feel guilty or fearful, that is something you need to run away from. Or any person that makes you feel fearful. Most Satanists do not accept Satan as an anthropomorphic being. He merely represents a force of nature, the powers of darkness, which have been named just that, because no religion has taken those forces out of darkness. So this is where he explains. So it's a metaphor, really. They are called darkness because it's unknown. It's an incognito. Nobody has used them. He is referring to a power that has not, as of yet, when this was written, been utilized. I believe that now it has been utilized, because with all of this life coaching, self-development, culture and resources, I think these are exactly the powers that we have tapped into. But on the other hand, there's a very confusing thing going on, because with the Illuminati, they took a lot of the things that Satanism has